Hi there, welcome in another video of Ansible series. Today we're going to continue with Ansible variables, and we'll start off with talking about register variables. So I'm here on my Ansible controller as always, and let me actually right at the start create a playbook called learn variables. .yaml, and we're gonna mark the beginning of our file as always, and we're gonna specify next our host pattern. And nothing has changed in this respect. We're still gonna use node1.lab.com machine, and down below here let's specify some tasks, and we're gonna name our first task demonstrate registered variables. And to do that, first of all, we will register a variable. To register variable, we use the keyword register, but first of all, we need to specify the module whose output we want to register. So to do that, we're going to use the shell module and cmd parameter. So we're going to pass a command that's going to be executed via the shell. So we're going to specify echo Ansible is super easy. And now we're going to use the register keyword. If we want to register a variable, we use the register keyword. And here we specify the variable, the name of a variable, where we want to save the output of our command. So now if we create another task called debug result var, and we're going to use the debug module to do that, and here we're going to specify var parameter, and we're going to pass in our newly created or registered variable. And let me save and exit out of this. We're going to run now our newly created playbook, and this should give us the return values of this registered variable. So as you can see, we have our task here, demonstrate registered vars, where we basically registered a variable called result. And down below here we have different keys and values that this module returns. And this can vary from module to module. As you can see, we have our cmd parameter that we passed to the shell module. We have standard outs, standard lines, standard out lines, and these are of different types. What I mean by that, if we take a look at Ansible documentation, and here we're going to specify the shell module. If we go to the end of our documentation, and we should see something like return values. So if you're interested what a specific module returns, definitely look up its documentation. As you can see, we have this here message return value, and this is of type boolean. We have standard error, cmd of type string, rc, and other return values and keys. Obviously, we can access each specific key, and I'm going to show you how we can do that. If you want to access a specific key of your registered variable, you can use either bracket notation or dot notation. Let's go with the bracket notation. We're gonna access the cmd key, and let's rerun this playbook. Now we should be able to see only the output or the value of cmd key instead of the whole our result variable. So that works perfectly fine. We are able to see the value of cmd key, but you're probably wondering, why would we use these registered variables? Well, these are basically used to decide whether you want to run a later task or not. So you might register the output of some command, and later on decide whether you want to run a later task. So let me add here to our playbook another task, and we're gonna call it, I think this is the right indentation level. Let's call it create some directory. And what we're gonna do is just create another task and we're gonna add a conditional, and basically we're gonna execute this task only if a certain condition is met. And that's what primarily these registered variables are used for. So we're gonna use the file module, and one of its required parameters is path. So we're gonna specify path and the name of our directory that we want to create, and we're gonna set state to directory instead of file, and we're gonna add a conditional here which basically has the when keyword, and we want to create this directory only if, and we open our double quotes here, only if result, we use the bracket notation, only if this key, which is a list, contains a certain string. So we can use built-in Python methods to on these return values. So here we can specify the string that we want to look for in our returned standard out key. So let's look for super easy. So what it basically means, this directory will only be created if this super easy string is found in our result standard out key return value. Okay, so let's save this. Let's save this and exit. There we go. Playbooks, let me take a look if everything is fine here. So we're gonna rerun this. Okay, so let's open this. There is some issue. There it is. I forgot to close our double quotes. So let me fix that quickly. There we go. And let's rerun this playbook. So let's see. This worked perfectly fine. So as you can see, this has a change status. So it basically means that the directory has been created. We can use something that we learned in the previous videos. Namely, we can use the command or ad hoc command on our remote machine to see if this directory has been created. So we can use listing here on this directory. And by default, if we don't specify, as you remember, if we don't specify the module name, it will use the command module. So as you can see, we have our directory created. So let me clear this, and we're going to continue with another type of variables that we very often use in Ansible, and these are variables that we pass by the command line. So to demonstrate that, I'm gonna remove what we have here. I'm gonna remove these lines here, and we're gonna change the name of this task. Instead of registered vars, we're gonna specify extra vars. And to demonstrate that, let me create here or specify something that we've already learned in the past. Let me specify a variable here called SSH port, and we're gonna set it to 26. And to demonstrate that, we're gonna use debug module and message parameter, and we're gonna say something along the lines SSH port has been set to, and we're gonna specify our variable name here. There we go. If we run this, obviously, the port that we should see should be 26. So let's see if that's correct. Yes, that's right. What if you want to override this? What if you want to override variables that you define in playbooks or in var files? Actually, that's very easy. The only thing you need to add is here another option, extra var, And here you can specify your variables in key value format. So we can do something like SSH port equals 22. And if we run this right now, this should override what we have in our playbook. There we go. This worked perfectly fine. This is not the only way how we can actually pass variables via the command line. We can pass in files with variables. So let me create a file called var.yaml, and here we're gonna create a variable called SSH port. We're gonna set it to 30. And to pass in files by the command line, what you need to do is add the @ symbol and your file name. So let's rerun this, and now we should get port 30. That's correct. So that worked perfectly fine. And just remember that if we use key value pairs, like in this example, the passed values will be interpreted as strings. If you wanted to have something like lists, integers, booleans, you would have to use JSON format. So we would have to use something like SSH port colon, and here you would have to specify 20, 22 or 30 in this case. Let's do it 30, and let's use double quotes. Let's close this curly brackets, and let's run this. So this is just another way of passing in variables via the command line if you want to pass not only strings but other values as well. So let me clear this, and we're going to continue now with something that you've probably seen. So whenever we run these playbooks, this is something that I've already mentioned. Whenever we run these playbooks, we can see something like facts gathering. This is happening by default unless we explicitly set facts gathering to no. And by default, Ansible tries to discover different kinds of information about our remote or managed nodes. And the easiest way to see what we can access, what kind of information we can access about our managed machines, is to use the setup module. So we're going to use this right now, and we're going to specify here the setup module, and we should be able to see the information that Ansible was able to gather about our remote machine. And these are basically information about IP, about networking, about operation systems, distribution, things like that. So there's a huge variety of information that you can access. And for example, based on this information, you can then decide as well whether to run a certain task or not. And I'm going to show you an example of this in a second. But if you are interested how to access each specific key, you can just let me copy this. Actually, let me go up here, and we are interested in the IPv4 address. So I'm gonna copy this this name here, variable name, and I'm gonna open our file with playbooks. There we go. And we can leave this probably, and we're gonna demonstrate facts gathering. So by default it is set to true unless we set it here to false. And if you want to access a specific variable, you can use this var parameter, and here I'm gonna paste this variable name. I must have it wasn't copied. Why? Okay, I'm gonna copy it one more time. Where is it? All right, copy. There we go. There we go. And we should be able to paste it. There we go. All right, so let's Let's save and exit, and I'm gonna rerun this playbook here. So if everything goes fine, we should be able to access this specific variable. As you can see, we are able to get the IP address. So that's how you can access each specific value. It can be very useful, as I've mentioned, to decide whether to run a later task or not. So what I mean by that, let me show you another example. We can do something like facts setting. So let's create another task called set some facts, and we're gonna use a set fact module to set our fact, so to speak, and we're gonna call it IPv4. And here in curly braces and in double quotes, because if we use double curly braces, we have to put double quotes around it. So we're gonna copy this name here, and what we're doing here is basically saving the content of this variable to our new variable called IPv4. So we are basically setting facts. So let's see how that works. Oh, by the way, let's actually, before we exit, let me debug this so we can see that that it works. Let's use debug module directly. Okay, 2 columns instead of 1, and we're gonna use directly IPv4. So let's see how that works. How it can be useful? Well, as you can see, it worked perfectly fine. Let's imagine that you are deploying an application within your environment, or let's imagine that you are installing antivirus on some Linux boxes in your environment. And probably at the beginning of your playbooks, you would like to check whether you have enough storage on your machines to install this kind of application. So you would get probably one of these gathered facts, which is available storage. You would set a fact, and depending on the value of your variable, you would decide, or Ansible would decide, whether you want to install this application or not. So that's how it can be useful. You can register variables, set facts, and based on this information, you can decide whether to run a later task or not. Before we wrap up for today, let's mention something that I haven't discovered in the last video, and which is part of play variables. And this is input in Ansible. How we can ask for input. So I'm gonna go back to my playbook here, and I'm gonna remove all these lines. And here, let's imagine that we have a user and we want to ask the user for some input. So to ask for input in Ansible, we can use var prompt keyword, and here we specify the name of a variable where we want to store our the input that the user provides. So let's call this variable name username, and here we're gonna provide the prompt parameter, and we're gonna ask the user what is your actually we're gonna specify provide your username, and we're gonna set private parameter to no, because by default when we use var prompt keyword it will hide the input that the user provides. So we're gonna set it to no, and down below here actually we're gonna use another var prompt, and we're gonna ask for password. This might be useful if you want to ask the user for some input passwords users, and you can leverage that when you are creating users on some machines. So let's provide our prompt here, and let's call it provide your password. And this time we will not set private to no, because we don't want to see the password We don't want to. We want the password to be hidden, right? So let's actually let me add something else to see that this works. We're gonna use tasks keyword here, and we're gonna specify debug task, and here we're gonna specify something like along the lines welcome, and we're gonna pass in our username variable. So that should do, and let's rerun this. As you can see, we are asked for input, so I'm gonna provide a fake name, Joe. I'm gonna provide some password, whatever, and let's see what happens. As you can see, we have this message here called Welcome Joe. So we were able to provide the input, and we were able to see this input in our playbook. So that's how we can ask for input in Ansible. This might be useful from time to time, but remember, try to avoid this because it makes our playbooks interactive. So that would be it for today. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and take care. Bye bye.